Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's a couple of musical detectives when I put Gordon Douglas's Tony Rome against Renny Harlin's The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. And now this one was a fun one to get through. I mean, both of these movies are, very much, kind of playing around with what we know as the film noir, private detective genre and stuff. So let's just dive right on in to the nitty and the picky to see like which one is the better movie. First up, we have Gordon Douglas's Tony Rome, which stars Frank Sinatra as the titular character. Now, the film itself, pretty fucking basic. But the one complaint, or not really a complaint, the one thing that bugs me about Tony Rome is that you got Frank Sinatra's daughter, Nancy Sinatra, singing the theme song, and it's all about like this character, like fucking all these chicks and stuff. You better watch out, Tony Rome will get him, Tony Rome will get, I can't sing as sexy as Nancy Sinatra can, but I don't know. It's just a weird way to open a film. The only thing that is probably weirder than that is when you got that Armageddon where Liv Tyler is getting, fingered with animal crackers by Ben Affleck to her father's song, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing. That's the weirdest one. So like Nancy Sinatra doing the theme song for her father where he's like talking about banging all these chicks and stuff. Not as weird in comparison, but still pretty fucking weird. But like I said, the film is the basic, like, private detective film noir thing. The character Tony Rome, we see him, coming in on a boat in the opening credit sequence. The film takes place in Miami, Florida, and, he ends up getting a call from an old partner of his. There's a drunk chick passed out in this hotel, and they need him to be discreet with it, And there's a line in the film that got me because this film was made in 1967. Mind you, the purview for the 70s versus the 90s is the era of what they call the New Hollywood, which started in 1967 and ended in 1980. That's the whole purview I'm taking for the 70s to fully show all the spectrum. But there's a line when the hotel manager asks Tony Rome's old partner, so you think they'll squeeze the cops will squeeze the hotel name out of him? And the guy responds with, is like, the day anybody squeezes anything out of Tony Rome is the day Georgia elects a black governor. And it got me to thinking, it's like, well, how timely is that? You know what's even fucking crazier? Georgia still hasn't elected a black governor. And so I guess nobody's squeezing shit out of Tony Rome. Fucking crazy. Just little known facts. In case you didn't know, now you motherfucking know. But like I said, he takes the daughter he takes the woman back who's the daughter of a very wealthy, like, businessman, contractor, whatever you want to call him. And, then, of course, a web of lies and intrigue unfolds. The most intriguing thing is the stunning Jill St. John, who was a Bond girl in Diamonds Are Forever. That'll be next Saturday or next weekend's matchup. Diamonds Are Forever versus License to Kill, another Bond matchup. But of course, she's kind of the femme fatale of the film. Definitely somebody that intrigues Tony Rome's character. And Sinatra's not bad as the private detective. I mean, he's no Bogart by any sense of the means, but he does have a few good lines in the film. And, he kicks his fair share of ass in this movie, because he gets his ass whooped a couple of times, but he dishes it out as well as he can take it and shit. Because, of course, he ends up having to look for some pin that got lost with the girl that he had to take back to the family, and then all of the, somebody's blackmailing the stepmom, which is played by the lovely Gina Rowlands, who of course was John Cassavetes' wife. A very early role for her before, not as prestigious as the shit that she would do with her husband Cassavetes, but and of course just twist after twist. And of course, like, Tony Rome has a brother played by Richard Conte who's a cop, and there's a few good scenes with them, but overall this is just the basic, like, film noir private detective shit, and definitely very telling of the kind of shit they made in the late 60s, when of course, like, especially 1967, when not only was violence in films opening up more, but also sexuality in films was opening up more. There's a really hilarious scene where this woman comes in to ask Tony Rome to help find out who's trying to poison her pussycat. And he asks, "Well, how come you think somebody's trying to poison your pussycat? Well, my pussy don't smile anymore. My pussy just frowns and stuff." And so, well, you to go over to the Burns Company. They're really good and they're specializing in making pussy smile and stuff. But other than that, like I said, the film is pretty basic in and of itself. And then we move forward to Renny Harlin's The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, starring the Dice Man himself, Andrew Dice Clay, as the titular character. And Ford Fairlane is a rock and roll detective in the city of Los Angeles. And, it's as wild as you would expect it to be, especially with the humorous stylings of Andrew Dice Clay. He really leans into his like kind of male chauvinist pig persona that he portrayed on the stage and stuff, and he definitely got some quirks. And of course this film is in that kind of a subgenre of films that I could be a little mistaken on the timeline of it, but I'm pretty sure comedy noir started in the 80s, and it really, like, the gems really rolled out in the 90s, because even something like Beverly Hills Cop, that's basically comedy noir. But which you had this shit like The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, and even later on with A Low Down Dirty Shame, Keenan Ivory Wayans film, where they take kind of the absurdities of film noir that was played straight all the way back in the late 40s after World War II and through the 50s, and kind of turning it on its ear. Of course, it's the early 90s. This film came out in 1990, and so it definitely deals with a lot of like the fucking extravagance of not only Los Angeles but the music industry. You get Wayne Newton, who plays a sleazy record producer. You also got Morris Day as a producer as well, and he's absolutely brilliant. A couple of appearances from other musicians like Sheila E. and Tone Loc in the film, and even Priscilla Presley is kind of a film noir, or not a femme fatale character in this film, because of course Ford Fairlane's character gets approached by an old friend of his, played by Gilbert Godfrey, who's a kind of a shock jock DJ, to try to find this chick named Zuzu Petals. And then, then that motherfucker gets electrocuted. And then Priscilla Presley's, "I need you to find Zuzu Petals," and all this shit. So it's really just like, this one too kind of twists and turn after twists and turn. But the beautiful thing about The Adventures of Ford Fairlane is it doesn't necessarily take itself seriously. And of course, it's a fucking comedy, and it shouldn't, And of course, like, even more of the film noir private detective tropes. This Ford Fairlane has an assistant played by the lovely Lauren Holly. Man, love those redheads, man. Woo. Jesus Jones, she's smoking hot. And of course, it's a lot of parallels to the Mike Hammer series, especially their dynamic. Because the assistant is kind of hung up on the detective, and the detective don't really give her the time of day until the end of the fucking film and shit. What kind of sentimental bullshit is this? Film also has fucking Robert Englund as a character called Smiley. Of course, Robert Englund, the legend that is Freddy Krueger. He did other films, but that motherfucker will always be Freddy Krueger, man. He's a true creeper, and he definitely creeps it up in this film. Not to mention Renny Harlin's first film was A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. And of course, like, Renny Harlin was one of the greatest action directors of all time. And he could even by this was probably the first movie that he did that had kind of a comedy air to it. Because there's like, there's a little bit of comedy in Nightmare on Elm Street 4, a little bit of comedy in Die Hard 2, but this is kind of the first one that's like a full-on comedy with action. It's as opposed to having action films with comedy. We're splitting hairs, I guess, but I think he balances this out well, because it's funny when it needs to be. It's action packed, like that fucking chase sequence through the cemetery. That shit's fucking insane, because you got the chick that he thinks dead. You got fucking Ford Fairlane driving that fucking hearse, so they think it's a dead chick, and then she wakes up. "Oh, you morticians sure know how to party," And his voiceover shit is great. Makes a lot of corny jokes. It's like, As they say, what's the definition of a vagina? It's the box that the penis comes in. Shit. Hey, that kind of shit. And the way he lights his cigarette is very colorful and shit. He's just a fucking character. The jackets that he wears, the extravagance, and also his dedication to the integrity of rock and roll music. He does a little rock solo. It's the only song I know how to do. I could have been a rock star, all that fucking shit. The movie knows what it is, and like it knows it's bullshit. It's just having fun as fuck. Cause even that kind of corny ass ending, that's the way. Like that might be my biggest complaint with comedies is they always end on such a high note. Why can't a fucking comedy end on a down note? Wouldn't that be even funnier? Who the fuck knows? Maybe somebody's got the balls to try it one of these days. I mean, shit. By the end of the day, what else has been done? But I mean, the ending of Tony Rome ain't much fucking better, man. I mean, he don't end up with the chick in the end. Jill St. John leaves because her husband is taking her back. They're gonna have a second honeymoon and all this shit. But but Frank Sinatra, so lame compared to Andrew Dice Clay. So that's why I gotta give it to The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, because one, it's just a more fun movie. Because by the time when Tony Rome was made, all that film noir shit had been done to death, and there really wasn't no way to reinvent the wheel. I mean, Altman kind of did it, with Elliot Gould and The Long Goodbye, but other than that, the '90s kind of opened up a different door to do film noir. Now granted, there's a lot of great neo noirs of the '70s, but a lot of those are highly overrated. If it ain't The Long Goodbye, Chinatown, or even Straight Time to a certain extent, most of them are fucking lame as fuck. Whereas in the '90s, their noirs took it to a whole other fucking level. And on top of that, we had some of the greatest comedy noirs, which is one of them being The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. And two, Renny Harlin is a far superior director to Gordon Douglas. They're both, in a way, journeyman directors, but at the same time, Renny Harlin made way more entertaining films. Like, what's his right now? He's currently sitting at 3-2, far as like in this little thing, in this little competition, so to speak. And three, if at the end of the day, the whole point of this shit is which movie do I want to sit down and watch? And I'd rather watch Adventures of Ford Fairlane, because it's also shorter than Tony Rome. And it's a lot better of a time. So, for anybody keeping score, that is 95 to 77. The 70s are only up by 18 now. The 90s keep coming back. Like the 70s will get one, and then the 90s will get one. And then they were on a streak. 70s broke it last week. But who knows? Maybe they're on a whole other streak now. This summer's in full swing. This shit's only heating up, So if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I really don't give a fuck. This is just one asshole's very long, self-indulgent journey to figure out which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. My money's still on the 70s, but you know what? The 90s had gems like The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. And you know what? They honestly knew how to make fun of themselves better than the 70s. The 70s, it was still kind of high on, the integrity and shit. The 90s, that shit went out the window because they lived through the fucking 80s. So, you know what? Hey, forget about it.